the first being freedom from the colonizer. The latest news from India about this kind of exacerbating inequality would have killed him, I think, a second time. Here is Gandhi's view on how ethics and economics can combine. Gandhi clearly pointed out that he did not draw a sharp or any distinction between economics and ethics. For him, it was clear that standard economic doctrine failed to take account of ethical considerations, and this meant that it was illusory and had little relevance to real life. I quote, "The economics that disregards moral and sentimental considerations are like waxworks that being lifelike still lack life. At every crucial moment, these newfangled economic laws have broken down, I hope so, in practice. And nations or individuals who accept them as guiding maxims must perish, but we are not perishing despite that." So Gandhi then put on the ground an economic program, which many people have said did not sustain itself, but it was an idea that in a way is possible in India today. It is starting from the poor and making them have some self-worth by giving what we were all talking about just now, a wide range of opportunities to earn income. We all laugh at the fact that Gandhi is seen with a spinning wheel. It looks completely archaic and idiotic. But the spinning wheel was only a kind of a symbol that you don't need anything but your hands to earn something. And he did do a good program, but I'm not trying to sell Gandhi here. But what I'm trying to sell is that here is a country which has such acute inequality, and can I, as a feminist, put in my energies to make sure that as many women or as many men are in the right positions, their wages are the same and so on, because there's a bigger issue. And so I have some data which I won't trouble you with, but in India at the moment, the majority of our GDP is coming from what we call the lower part of the economy. I'll give you some data which is very, in my view, interesting. There's an economist in the Swiss, Credit Suisse organization. He refers to something called the hidden growth. For those of you who are interested in the hardcore of data, India had 42 million enterprises in 2005, while it had less than million companies. I know you know the difference between a company, a big private sector corporate, and enterprise, which is those self-employed and other hawkers who live on the streets. 42 million of those compared to 1 million of companies. 90% of India's workforce is engaged in the informal economy, that is not in companies. About half of India's GDP is informal, that is not generated by incorporated companies. Productivity and growth has been the most dramatic in this informal side of the economy. These are usually home-based production and employment. And then we go down to some of India's old industries, the village industries, handloom, which many of you may have heard of as more artifacts. These are employing large numbers of women and men even now. And interestingly, out of them, 78% are women and 11 belong to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe are the Dalits. So this is providing wage for what you call the least or the last or the least privileged. But it's still a small portion. So as I came out of India this time, there is a national concern of unemployment as we have in all our countries. They're talking of skill development. But in the meantime, the pressure is so great that women are going into the factories that I talked to you about, that is exploitation of the worst kind. So again, I end with something that Diana has heard me sell in every conference that I've been with her. That is, the existing model of economic growth needs to be reconstructed by feminists. We know what injustice is, we know what inequality is, more than any other sort of subsect of the human race. And if we don't think of how we can work towards a larger equality in economics, so I feel there needs to be a moral awakening. So I argue like this, I end like this. We need to build a theory of economic growth, political and groundbreaking, something which includes the idea of justice in partnership with morality or morals, with the poor as the central figures. Within that ocean of change, if we concentrate on the poor, or along with those waves, gender inequalities would have a place or need to be given a place. So not the main aim, but part of the river. The field is fertile for another model of GDP growth, starting from the bottom and bubbling up instead of trickle down. Building such a theory and selling it to public policy, the state and other actors is a great task which I think we feminists, driven by our moral sensibilities, are capable of doing. In other words, taking off from our preoccupation with gender inequality and for another type of economic theory should be our drive, another growth theory. We have the experience, the skills, the knowledge to do this. Hence my argument that gender equality as an objective, as a preeminent topic among feminists, needs to give place to moral imperative of removal of extreme poverty. Now, building another macroeconomic theory is not an easy thing. I understand that. But I thought that we have, as you have seen today, we have so much preoccupied with measuring gender inequality, finding ways of twisting it in and out. But could we not, as a movement, use our energies, we've been using our energies, especially in the UN, to tweak gender inequality into equality in many, many ways. UNDP, HDR, we're all looking at that. The first presentation about those indices is also about that. But whether intellectually and morally we can apply our minds to another form of building economic policy such that the poor become the bottom-up approach. That is, you start with those who are unemployed, who are deprived, and think of an economic strategy which comes up. It's a kind of dream, and you can imagine at this point in my life, I feel I have a right to dream. That we might do something interesting. Thank you, Dan. I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Devaki, for reminding us we need to go beyond catching up with men in the existing context and really address those broader issues of changing, as we say, changing the existing model of economic growth and bringing the morality back into the front. So, do we have some comments and questions?
Well, I have two thoughts. I'm Thalia Kidder. One of them is that you ended and said very much about the immorality of extreme poverty. And yet a lot of what you were talking about was extreme inequality. And I'm wondering what your perspective is about whether the strategy or whether the way to go at is about ending extreme inequality or about poverty.
I'm glad you asked that question. My reasoning, I link the two.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I've written so much on this for UNDP in saying that poverty exists because of inequality. And how I argue that is, inequality is about power, whether it's economic power, political power, and so on. So as long as you have an unequal economic power, why would a powerful corporate try to, his whole purpose would be to keep that thing going, and that requires not to be just but unjust. So I always argue that inequality is, poverty is a result of inequality, both political, economic, and social. And that's the link I make. That our preoccupation with gender, instead of that we preoccupy ourselves with overall inequality. Yeah.
No, I was wondering, India is now one of the major players in the global market.
Yeah.
And obviously the way you can stay in the global market is through exploitation. Yeah. And that's the premise of the kind of development that is taking place. Yeah. So I think when you say that feminists, but there are different kinds of feminists, and there isn't just one feminist that believes in just projecting women into everything. It's a struggle for justice, right? So I think in our struggle for, whether it's through legal reform or economic policies and so on, we have tried to address the state into making changes we find the state has been a failure. So would you say then that in your dream you're thinking in terms of how to change the social structure, to go through the society?
I mean, if you look at economic reasoning that we've inherited, whether it is Adam Smith or Keynes or all of them, at this point what has happened with economic reason is in our countries, this post-liberalization is just saying free finance and free trade will get you growth, and it is getting us growth, but a very unequal growth. So how do we, I think, who is that man who set up the Institute of New Economics?
George
One
Soros.
of our economist friends.
George Soros.
So people are trying to rethink economics, are trying to rethink indicators. But we are not compelled to rebuild an economics. And you're right, I mean, what we are doing is what is causing that kind of inequality. It's leaving people behind like crazy. And the rich are getting so rich in India, it's just abhorrent to see that. I'm sure it's happening
That's the
elsewhere.
basis of your democracy.
Yes.
What are the political reasons why the effect of this of this economic policy of the last 25 years has had such a devastating effect on the poorest in society? Why is their voice not reflected politically so as to put pressure on decision makers to change policy?
It's my reasoning, I'm not sure whether that, my feeling is that unless we actually produce an economic theory which gives GDP growth but doesn't, that is, it cannot be done by voice, organized resistance. There are a lot of organized criticism of the current economic policy in India. You just have to open an Economic Times in India and you see this is wrong. We know that the current liberalization trade program is really harassing our population, and for the sake of Marks and Spencers or something like that. But the theory says free movement of capital and free trade will make your GDP grow. And GDP is growing. GDP is growing in our countries. So then we have this other alternative road that some of us are taking. It is that the measure called GDP is wrong. That by measuring GDP, you're not giving weights to the place from which GDP is coming.